I mean, I love Bob Dylan. I mean, yeah, I think he's great. And in the very beginning, I knew he was great. And yesterday, I was walking down the street, and there's this guy.
Today, Neil Young has finally spoken, and what he reveals about Bob Dylan is sending shockwaves through the music world. For decades, these two giants of songwriting stood like twin pillars of rock history. But behind the respect, beneath the tributes, and beyond the poetic lines, there was something else. A rivalry that never healed. A series of betrayals, jealousies, and creative collisions that Neil Young has now decided to expose. This isn't just another story about two rock icons disagreeing. This is a tale of obsession, competition, and silent warfare. And at the heart of it is Bob Dylan, a man revered like a prophet, but who, behind closed doors, left behind a trail of damaged relationships, fractured trust, and emotional chaos. Think of the 1970s when Neil Young's raw, guitar-driven confessions clashed with Dylan's cryptic biblical verses. The public saw mutual admiration, but what they didn't see was a creative tension so sharp it nearly tore them apart. Dylan watched as Young's popularity soared, especially after albums like Harvest and Tonight's the Night. Critics began to whisper that Neil was becoming the new voice of a generation, and Dylan didn't take it lightly. Dylan would deliberately ignore Young in public, dismiss his work in private, and avoid sharing stages. At music festivals, they were booked on the same nights, but never played together. Dylan grew cold, Young became defensive, and soon what could have been a legendary friendship turned into something far darker, a cold, artistic arms race. The tension wasn't only musical. Behind the scenes, there were stinging encounters and backhanded jabs. Dylan refused to attend certain benefits if Young was present. In the 1980s, when both artists were signed to major labels, Dylan reportedly blocked collaborative efforts that would have united their voices. Young, disillusioned, started writing songs that subtly alluded to Dylan's spiritual aloofness and detachment. The message was clear: Bob had abandoned the cause, while Neil was still on the front lines, protesting oil pipelines and singing about the working class. Dylan had withdrawn into vague mysticism and personal isolation. Their feud simmered for years. At times it flared in public when Neil gave cold interviews about Dylan's inconsistency. At other times, it stayed hidden in silence and avoidance. But the emotional scar remained deep, personal, and unresolved.
Yeah, just rocking, and I could hear Bob's voice, and I went, he's at, this is Bob, this is the essence.
Neil isn't the only one who clashed with Dylan. In fact, Bob's entire career is dotted with battles, grudges, and betrayals. He broke Joan Baez's heart and left her humiliated during a European tour in 1965, refusing to let her share the stage after she had helped launch his career. He mocked and ignored Paul Simon, fueling one of the most passive-aggressive rivalries in rock history. John Lennon, once fascinated by Dylan, grew increasingly disgusted with his cryptic ego and accused him of elitism. Even George Harrison, a close friend, distanced himself after Dylan's erratic behavior during the traveling Wilburys years. Producers, session musicians, and tour managers all tell the same story. Dylan was brilliant, but difficult, cold, unforgiving. He'd cut people off for minor slights and walk away from collaborations without explanation. Loyalty was never guaranteed. Behind the sunglasses and the cryptic lyrics, Dylan's personal life was no less turbulent. His first marriage to Sarah Lowndes was marked by emotional withdrawal and affairs. The divorce was bitter, and his children, especially Jakob Dylan, struggled under the shadow of their father's fame and detachment. Dylan's religious transformation in the late 70s shocked everyone. Friends were stunned, longtime collaborators walked away, and fans were torn between loyalty and confusion. Dylan seemed to shed identities like Coates, folk prophet, rock poet, Christian crusader, recluse. In private, he was known to disappear for weeks, retreating to isolated homes and avoiding all contact. There were rumors of breakdowns, health scares, and long stretches of emotional instability. Some say he lost all sense of who he really was. Others say he never knew. You've probably heard of Bob Dylan, the legend. But the man behind the legend, he was haunted. Haunted by expectations, by the weight of his myth, by the people he left behind. His greatness was undeniable, but so was the damage. Today, as Neil Young finally lays the truth bare, the legacy of Bob Dylan becomes something more human. more tragic, more real. This is the story of the genius who shaped music and destroyed friendships in the process. And it's only just beginning. As the decades passed, Dylan's myth only grew. He won awards, honors, and even the Nobel Prize in Literature. But for those who had once stood beside him, the success felt hollow. Dylan, once a voice of unity, had become a symbol of solitary genius. He didn't celebrate with others, he shut them out. Musicians who had once idolized him, people like Patti Smith, Van Morrison, and even Bruce Springsteen, found themselves disillusioned. Some walked away after brief encounters, others were left heartbroken by Dylan's cold detachment. It wasn't just that he was distant, it was that he seemed to forget they ever mattered. In the end, the cult that grew around Dylan seemed to protect him from the very thing he needed most: connection. Reverence replaced friendship, worship replaced honesty, and Bob Dylan, the man who once changed the world with a single line, became a ghost in his own legend. Bob Dylan didn't just alienate collaborators, he repelled icons. Eric Clapton once attempted to collaborate with Dylan but left after just one session, calling the experience emotionally numbing. The session, according to insiders, was filled with long silences, cryptic responses, and a refusal from Dylan to engage. Clapton, used to passionate musical dialogue, found the experience cold and disorienting. Leonard Cohen, once a deep admirer, drifted away after a series of tense, uncomfortable meetings. Dylan would mock Cohen's poetic style, often comparing it unfavorably to his own. He'd recite Cohen's lyrics with a smirk or rewrite them on scraps of paper as parodies. Cohen, wounded but graceful, never fought back, he simply stepped away. Their friendship dissolved in quiet disappointment. Even Joni Mitchell, a fellow voice of the counterculture, publicly distanced herself from Dylan, accusing him of being a plagiarist and calling his mystique a mask hiding a man with no emotional integrity. She once said his charm was merely a disguise, a shield behind which he hid his true emptiness. Their relationship, once warm and rooted in shared artistic revolution, became cold, sharp, and irreparable. And it didn't end there. Dylan's short-lived supergroup ventures, like the Traveling Wilburys, were plagued by jealousy and creative blockades. While the public saw smiles and harmony, the private truth was far messier. Tensions grew as Dylan took control, rewriting parts, dismissing input, and pulling away from camaraderie. Members of the band, once his most loyal allies, revealed that Dylan often treated them as background noise, musicians meant to follow, not contribute. As the years went on, more artists walked away, Tom Petty disillusioned by Dylan's detachment, George Harrison tired of emotional stonewalls. Even Bruce Springsteen, who once idolized Dylan, began to keep his distance. The deeper the praise for Dylan grew, the smaller his inner circle became. Admiration created distance. Reverence built walls. For many, the choice was stark: admire Dylan from afar or risk being cut by his silence up close. Because getting too close to the legend often meant discovering the loneliness buried inside the man. Dylan's personal tragedies didn't end with broken friendships. Inside his family, too, the wounds ran deep. His relationship with his children was often strained by long absences, emotional detachment, and the impossibility of living up to his name. Jakob Dylan, frontman of the Wallflowers, carved out his own career, but did so under the crushing weight of his father's cold distance. They shared a bond of blood, but rarely of warmth. Jakob often admitted that his father's presence felt more like a shadow than a guiding light. Other children stayed completely out of the spotlight, protected, or perhaps hidden, by a father who wanted privacy more than connection. There were whispered rumors that Dylan maintained different homes for different stages of his life, separate addresses, separate families, separate versions of himself. Some family members admitted in private circles that they barely knew the man behind the name. Holiday dinners were reportedly quiet, formal, even uncomfortable. Emotional closeness was replaced by awkward respect. There were no bedtime stories, no fatherly advice, only distant nods and glances that said, "Keep your distance." His second marriage to Carolyn Dennis was kept secret for years, even from many friends. When it was revealed, it stunned the world. Dylan had a daughter, born in secrecy, hidden from public view. The secrecy wasn't romantic, it was a symptom of a man who couldn't let anyone get too close, even those who shared his blood. Friends close to the family said Carolyn lived with long periods of uncertainty, never quite knowing where Bob stood, physically or emotionally. And the daughter? She grew up in silence, unknowingly part of one of the most guarded secrets in modern music history. Even in old age, Dylan reportedly struggles with connection. Family gatherings are rare, phone calls go unreturned. His children, now adults, carry the name, the weight, and the mystery. They live in the shadow of a man who wrote songs that defined human feeling, but often failed to express his own. In the end, the story of Bob Dylan isn't just about genius, it's about cost. The price of being worshipped, the toll of shutting the world out. Dylan remains one of the most admired figures in modern music, but admiration doesn't equal closeness, and legacy doesn't erase loneliness. Neil Young's confession pulls back the final layer. The songwriter who captured generations was, in truth, a man running from himself. He crafted identities like lyrics, hid behind metaphors, and built walls of poetry to keep real emotion at bay. Behind every standing ovation was an empty room. Behind every song, a silence too deep to break. There's no final redemption here, no neatly tied ending, only the haunting truth of a man who gave the world his words but kept his soul locked away. The echo of his silence will last just as long as his music. And now that the truth is out, the legend will never sound the same again.